My name is Detective Pierce. I've worked cases in cities, jungles, and deserts. I've chased killers through crowded streets and across empty plains. But this was different. This place wasn't even supposed to exist. It began with a letter that arrived at my London office in late January, a time when the city is cold enough to keep most people indoors. The envelope had no return address, no stamp from any recognizable post office. Inside, there was a single photograph, a wide underground hall, built like a metro station, yet it was completely frozen over. Ice hung from the ceiling in long stalactites, coating the tiled walls like a crystal shell. In the middle of the empty platform stood a wooden chair, untouched by frost, facing the camera as if someone had placed it there for me. At the bottom of the photo, written in neat block letters, was a message. People vanish here. Find the truth. I've learned to ignore most anonymous tips. But this one, something about it sank its hooks into me. A week later, I was on a plane headed north, far beyond the last cities, to an Arctic settlement so small it didn't even appear on most maps. My contact, a man named Henrik, was waiting for me at the airstrip in an old track snow vehicle. He was tall, with pale eyes and skin weathered by wind and cold. "You're here for the station," he said flatly, not bothering to shake my hand. On the way, I asked him why there was an underground metro in a place with fewer than 100 permanent residents. He kept his eyes on the endless white horizon. "Don't ask," he said after a long silence. "They don't like it when people talk about the past." When we finally reached the entrance, I realized the place was even stranger than the photograph had shown. The entrance tunnel was carved into the ice itself, reinforced with rusting steel plates. A staircase descended sharply into the frozen dark. The air grew unnaturally humid as we went deeper, our boots crunching on frost. The platform below was silent, except for the slow drip of melting ice somewhere in the distance. Old advertising posters clung to the walls, their colors washed away, the images barely visible under the frost. Yet in places, I saw fresh footprints in the snow. At the far end of the platform stood a sealed iron door, coated in rust but not in ice, as if something behind it gave off heat. Etched into the metal were dozens of symbols, Old Norse runes, though the sequence made no coherent words. My time studying strange cases had taught me that such markings rarely meant anything good. Henrik stopped several meters away. "If you open that door," he said quietly, "you might not come back." I looked at him. "Why?" He shook his head. "Because they don't let people leave, once you've seen them." The sound of water dripping echoed again, louder now. I had the feeling that whatever was behind that door already knew I was here. Henrik refused to follow me past the midpoint of the platform. He leaned against a frost-covered pillar, his breath a thin white mist in the dim light. "If you're smart," he muttered, "you'll turn back now." I ignored him. The sealed iron door was like a magnet. My eyes kept returning to those carved runes. They weren't decorative. They were a warning. Each one had been cut deep, with a hand steady enough to make the symbols perfectly symmetrical despite the rust. I pressed my gloved palm against the cold metal. The surface vibrated faintly, as though something massive was moving far beyond it. With a grunt, I turned the old wheel lock in the center. It resisted at first, then gave way with a shriek of corroded hinges. A wave of warm, stale air rolled out, thick enough to fog my glasses. The tunnel beyond was narrow, its walls covered not in frost, but in a strange translucent layer, as if the ice had melted here and then refrozen in glass-like sheets. The electric lamps overhead flickered weakly, buzzing in protest against the cold. I descended further. The ground sloped downward, and soon I realized we were far below sea level. I could hear the faint rush of water through unseen pipes, accompanied by something else, a soft, rhythmic clicking. The first body was impossible to miss. It lay in the middle of the passage, sprawled on its back, eyes frozen open in an expression of utter terror. The skin was pale, frostbitten, but the torso was hollow. Every organ was gone, replaced by a sculpture of solid ice shaped to mimic the missing anatomy. Whoever, or whatever, had done this had worked with disturbing precision. I crouched beside it, fighting the instinct to recoil. There were no defensive wounds, no sign of a struggle. Just emptiness inside. Further along, I found more bodies. Some were seated against the walls as though resting. Others were lying in shallow puddles where the ice beneath them had begun to melt. Every single one was hollow. My light caught movement ahead. I froze. Something had just slipped out of sight around the next corner. Tall, impossibly thin, with limbs too long to be human. I followed, each step crunching softly against frost-dusted tiles. The clicking grew louder. When I reached the bend, I saw the source of the sound, a massive underground hall. It was far larger than any normal metro station, its ceiling lost in shadows. The walls were lined with old train carriages, all sealed shut, their windows blacked out. In the center of the hall stood 3 figures. They weren't moving, yet I could hear the clicking, a constant, mechanical sound like bones knocking together. I lifted my flashlight, and the beam revealed the truth. They weren't standing. They were hanging, suspended from the ceiling by ropes of frozen sinew, their heads bowed, their bodies swaying gently in the faint current of air. Then one of them looked up. Its eyes glowed faintly blue, light spilling from the empty sockets. The jaw unhinged too far, and from deep within came a distorted voice. A chorus, not a single speaker. "Why do you walk where the ice remembers the dead?" I didn't answer. My hand went instinctively to the revolver under my coat. The thing tilted its head, and the other 2 followed in perfect synchronization. Then, all at once, the ropes snapped. The figures dropped to the ground without a sound, landing on limbs that bent in ways they shouldn't. I stepped back, my boots slipping slightly on the frost. They began moving toward me, slow at first, then faster, their clicking limbs scraping against the tiles. I turned and ran. The tunnel back to the iron door felt a mile long, my breath burning in my lungs. I didn't dare look behind me, but I could hear them, the clicking now joined by a low, wet dragging sound. I burst onto the platform, startling Henrik. "They're coming," I gasped. He stared past me, his eyes widening. "You opened it," he whispered, almost accusingly. "You let them smell you." Before I could answer, the lights above us flickered violently. A deep, guttural sound echoed from the stairwell leading to the surface, not from below, but from above, as though something else had been waiting for us outside. Henrik grabbed my arm before I could bolt up the stairs. "Don't run to the surface," he hissed. "That's where it started." The clicking below was getting closer. The guttural sound above was louder now, heavier, like ice grinding against steel. I had seconds to decide. "Explain." "No," I demanded. He took a deep breath, his eyes darting toward the shadows at the far end of the platform. "This station, it's not on any map because it was never finished. Built in 1953, during the Cold War, to hide something the Soviets found beneath the ice. They called it the Svalbard core. Nobody knows what it really was, a meteor fragment, an artifact, maybe even a living thing. But when they brought it up here, people started changing." I remembered the translucent ice, the hollow bodies. "What about the creatures?" Henrik's face twisted. "They're not creatures. They're the last survivors of the original crew." The clicking was at the tunnel mouth now. 3 elongated silhouettes emerged, their glowing eyes locking on us. Henrik shoved something into my hand, a steel flask, warm to the touch. "This is the last of it. Meltwater from the core's containment ice. They hate it. You throw it, you run." I didn't argue. The first of them lunged forward, moving with insect-like precision. I hurled the flask at its chest. The metal split open mid-air, releasing a hiss of steam as the liquid splashed against the pale flesh. The effect was instant. The figure let out a deafening, inhuman shriek as the frost coating its skin cracked and fell away, revealing a withered, almost human form beneath. It collapsed, twitching violently. The other 2 paused just long enough for us to sprint toward the service tunnels. Henrik led the way, weaving through rusted maintenance doors and narrow, ice-choked passages. We finally burst into an equipment room lit by a single flickering bulb. A massive crank protruded from the wall, connected to a set of thick iron floodgates. Henrik threw his weight against it, groaning with effort. "What are you doing?" I demanded. "Ending this," he grunted. "The gates will flood the lower levels with seawater, salt water. It'll kill them, or at least bury them again." The clicking grew louder behind us. They'd found us. I grabbed the crank alongside him, and together we forced it to turn. Somewhere deep below, metal groaned and water roared. The last thing I saw as we slammed the door shut was the two remaining figures charging down the hallway, their bodies twisting unnaturally, jaws open wide. Then silence. Just the sound of water rushing through the tunnels. Henrik sank to the floor, breathing heavily. "You shouldn't have come here, detective," he said, almost smiling. "But thank you." Hours later, I emerged into the weak Arctic daylight. The snow outside was untouched, the world above unaware of what had just happened below their feet. Before I boarded the supply plane back to the mainland, I filed my final report. Case closed. Unregistered Cold War Metro Facility, Svalbard. Cause of death for recovered bodies: extreme hypothermia, exsanguination, structural ice infiltration. Hostile entities neutralized via saltwater flooding. Recommend sealing all known entrances permanently. As the plane lifted off, I glanced back at the icy coastline. The station was gone, buried once more. But the clicking, I swore I could still hear it, faint and patient, waiting for the next fool to break the seal.